would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another YouTube episode of Film Stories with me, Dan Cooper. And it's a quick one from me this week, but an interesting one, I feel. Having been writing a piece this week for Film Stories print magazine, available now online and at selected physical vendors throughout the UK, see our website for more details, got my plug in early this week. Having been working on a piece this week for an upcoming issue where I was researching and writing about some really mercenary decision making by the Hollywood machine and looking into the impacts of those types of cold, bottom line focused choices on the lives and on the happiness of real people. That got me to wanting to kind of focus instead on a story of meaningful human interaction, of warmth, of honour, and look at how sometimes acting as one of life's good guys can be good for everybody and good for business too. We talked about James Cameron here on the YouTube channel fairly recently when we looked at Aliens and paid special reference to Cameron's positive representation of female characters. Although Cameron himself would probably be the first to admit that he hasn't always exhibited entirely positive qualities as a director, we're feeling all sunshiny and happy here today at Film Stories. So let's look at another feel-good story with Cameron, who by some measures is the most successful director of all time. That is, if your mode of measuring includes who has, not adjusted for inflation, made up, until this week at least, the two highest grossing films of all time. I say this week because Avengers Endgame has now supplanted Titanic's number 2 spot, may well go on to displace Cameron's other money spinner, 2009's Avatar, and only time will tell in that regard. Well, maybe the Avengers can tell because they can control time. We will get to Avengers Endgame at some point, surely. But this is not about Avengers Endgame. This film story then occurs back before the MCU in the 90s as Cameron is wrapping up the significant post-production period on Titanic. So this is 1996, 1997, and at this point Cameron is in a meeting with Fox, the studio who financed the film. And he's in a meeting with Jim Giannopoulos, who is the head of Fox's international division, and the two are discussing marketing, chiefly the film's global promotional tour. Now, the international market for Titanic was absolutely crucial to Fox because as Titanic's budget was so high, its production budget was so huge, they'd approached Paramount to co-finance the movie. Now, co-financing deals, there's a whole film story there that we'll maybe get to one day. Paramount had agreed, and they'd stumped up $65 million, and in doing so, their end of it was the film's domestic rights. So the American gross would go to Paramount. Now, Fox therefore had to make Titanic a smash hit internationally. Or, as they'd put up the bulk of the production, and they would only be getting the from cinema run at least the international profits. So you had to make the film a success internationally, and they were discussing the film's global promotional tour, and James Cameron wanted to go to, of all places, Russia. Why Russia? It's a good question, and one that Giannopoulos, the head of, as you said, the head of Fox's international division, was asking himself as well. He was desperate to get Cameron to agree to a 15-country publicity tour, of which Russia was definitely not part, because at that point, in the kind of mid-90s, Russia was an insignificant market for Hollywood. Moscow itself, the capital, had only boasted one state-of-the-art cinema, because, after all, it had only been 5 or so years since the collapse of the communist Soviet Union, and the country was certainly not in the habit of screening Hollywood films. Cameron's intent in visiting Russia links back to that meaningful human interaction that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. He'd worked with a Russian crew whilst investigating and filming the ruin of the Titanic. That chance, opportunity that he enjoyed to dive and to use submersible craft to explore and film the Titanic, he said was actually the main reason for him coming up with the idea for the film and pitching it. He wanted an excuse to explore the shipwreck. And some of the scenes that you see at the beginning of the movie are a result of those dives. And in doing so, in that process, he'd grown close to the Russians, probably physically close. I imagine there's not a lot of room on those submersibles. But they'd formed an emotional bond as well, and Cameron promised them that when the film was complete, he would bring it to Russia and he would screen it for them. And Cameron was true to his word. He took the film to Moscow, but not before taking it to Kaliningrad, where these Russians were based. And Kaliningrad was a tiny port city with an auditorium, which Fox then duly kitted out into a state-of-the-art movie theatre, and Cameron, as he promised, visited and screened the film to this tiny port city. And whilst they were there, they then took the film onto Moscow, and the film found an audience there. And bigger than that, it sparked an interest in a Hollywood film that would grow and grow and grow. And this, of course, was part of a wider cultural movement at the time. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of communism had resulted in a growing interest in the West. And I mean, after all, McDonald's had opened a venue in Red Square, I think at the beginning of the 90s. But certainly for cinema, Titanic helped to prise open a market that wasn't there before. And Giannopoulos would say that within 5 years, Russia had become one of Fox's 5 biggest markets. And the moment sparked, or at least marked, a spike in a continuing trend of international markets continuing to become more important than domestic grosses for Hollywood. So there you go, a short one, but a lesson there. Sometimes a promise formed on friendship can be good for business too. As for those mercenary decisions that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, you'll have to look out for the next issue of Film Stories print magazine to find out more. This month's issue is still available right now, and we're very, very proud of it. Do check it out. If you want more film stories, you can find Simon's podcasts over at your podcast provider of choice. You can find us on Twitter at Film Stories Pod. You can find us on Facebook at Film Stories Online or at our website, filmstories.co.uk. If you did enjoy this episode, please do like, please subscribe, and I'll see you back here next week for another film story. Bye-bye.